Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live event to discuss the return of power sharing at Stormont and what's next for government in Northern Ireland. I'm Matthew Morrison. I'm a senior account director here at Cavendish Consulting, and I'm delighted to be joined today by two high-profile members of the restored Stormont Assembly. First, we have Matthew O'Toole, who is the leader of the opposition, the chair of the Finance Committee, and an SDLP MLA for South Belfast. And we also have Phillip Brett, who is the chair of the Economy Committee and a DUP MLA for North Belfast. What we want to do today is look at what the return to power sharing means and discuss some of the key outcomes that we can expect to see from devolved government now that is back after 2 years. Perhaps I can hand over maybe Matthew to you first to tell us a bit more about yourself and the role that you undertake at Stormont and your party's priorities for the remainder of the term.
Thanks, Matt, and good to see you, Philip. Obviously, we see a lot of one another in our finance committee and back at Stormont. I'm really pleased to be asked to participate in this webinar. And I suppose I would say that I think it's really important that not just your clients, but people who are engaged in business, especially in not just potential investors, but people who have an interest in politics at Stormont, in London and Dublin, are fully abreast of what's happening and get more than just the headline Punch and Judy and get a little sense of where things are going and some of the under the bonnet issues. My name is Matthew O'Toole, as you said. I lead the SDLP group at Stormont, the Assembly. I don't lead the party overall, but I am now leader of the opposition, which is a title that's relatively novel. I was at the behest of one of my party colleagues calling myself that for a while when there was a degree of legal uncertainty whether I was entitled to call myself that, but I am now officially entitled to call myself the leader of the opposition without any puffery or doubt. We are the only party that is in opposition. We got 8 MLAs at the last election. We didn't have a great election, so technically, we weren't entitled to a ministry, but there have been jiggery-pokery in the past where parties not entitled to be in government get in any way. We very much decided that we thought it would be politically wise, but also, I think, in terms of moving our politics and democracy forward in Northern Ireland, useful to have an opposition. A constructive opposition is what we said consistently, so we won't be sniping an oppositional for its own sake, but we will be robust, constructive, and hopefully fair. So that's the approach we'll take to opposition. My own background is a relatively unusual one for a Northern Ireland politician. I was a journalist and a UK government civil servant for a long time, and then ended up back in the Assembly after the last restoration 4 years ago. In terms of what the priorities are for the new Assembly, I think the immediate priorities are stabilisation of public services, and there's a relative degree of unanimity across all of the 5 sort of main represented parties, and that's 4 in the executive and 1 in opposition. It's clear that public services in Northern Ireland are, in a dreadful state. We have basically, I think, the worst waiting lists, certainly for elective procedures, and A&E is awful too. Among the worst, not just in these islands, i.e. the UK and Ireland, but in Western Europe. So we need to address that urgently, but it needs to be a long-term plan to. And this is what we're going to be doing in opposition. We will be pushing constantly for not just aspiration, which we in Northern Ireland are very good at. We're very good at 2 big things over the last 20 odd years, theatrical and sometimes semi-coordinated fallings out, and sort of a slight kind of, from my party's perspective, a fairly tribal Punch and Judy, and then lots of political chaos, or actually coming together in what can be slightly cloying at times and not actually that productive. What we'd like to do in our own opposition is move towards a slightly more constructive type of politics where we aren't either at one another's throats or theatrically hugging. We are simply doing our jobs of being in government and in opposition, and being the government having a mandate to do things like they do now, dealing with public sector pay is another short-term one, then rescuing public services, and then we as the opposition hold the other executive parties to account. So the key priority in the short term is paying public sector workers. We welcome the fact the finance minister made an allocation yesterday, which comes close to, doesn't quite cover the entirety of the pay offers, but then we obviously want to see the various pay deals for all the public sector workforces concluded as soon as possible. We will then be asking for and pushing for a rescue plan, effectively alongside alongside a costed plan to improve public services. And then in the longer term, something we haven't had in a very long time, two things we haven't had in a long time that are connected to one another. One is a multi-year program for government, and then a multi-year budget connected to that. I've probably said enough at this point. I'm happy to go into any more detail on any of those themes.
No, that sounds good. No, thanks for that. It's really interesting and really useful overview. But Philip, I'll hand over to you maybe and to do the same. Tell everyone a bit about yourself, your role, and a bit about what the DUP's priorities now that they have negotiated the recent deal with the UK government and returned to power sharing at Stormont.
Okay, thank you for that, Matthew. Yeah, my name is Phillip Brett. I am DUP MLA here in North Belfast, elected for the first time to the Northern Ireland Assembly in May 2022, but I've served as an elected representative for the past 11 years. Outside of elected politics, I worked for the DUP in London during our confidence and supply agreement between 2017 and 2019 with the Conservative government. And since my election to the Assembly, I've served as previously the party's infrastructure spokesperson and now chair of the Economy Committee of the Northern Ireland Assembly. Your viewers will be aware that the DUP have always prioritised the economic department within Northern Ireland, and the past 20 years has seen a real transformation here in Northern Ireland in our economy, with the growth of both SMEs homegrown here, but also with FDI investment. We've spent the last 2 years trying to focus on restoring the institutions on a solid foundations, which command the cross-community support required to ensure that Northern Ireland is able to move forward. It took longer than it needed to do, but we have now got that solid basis from which all parties and all communities here can now come together to work for the collective betterment of Northern Ireland. So our focus will be, as Matthew says, on stabilising public services, but also delivering for communities right across Northern Ireland. I said in my maiden speech last week, Matthew, that the test of Stormont is not simply about its return, but how we use Stormont to deliver for all sections of our society. So our focus will be on providing childcare free at the point of need for as many people as possible, and growing the economy on that regionally balanced approach that we're all very keen to see.
I thought it would be good maybe just to cover some of the areas that will be of interest to the audience and to people who are watching today, but also that sit within the portfolios that you guys cover, which is both finance and economy. Obviously, Matthew, looking at the finance portfolio for a moment, your party as the official opposition, but also you as chair of the finance committee, will have a particular role in scrutinising the spending of the Department of Finance and the wider Northern Ireland executive. I wonder, just maybe if you want to talk a bit about your priorities, about what you see as kind of scrutinising the role of the finance department, and how you see kind of the relationship between yourself and the department evolving over time.
Well, I would say my overarching priority in that scrutiny role, but as the finance spokesperson and the leader of the opposition, one big thematic priority that I genuinely do care about, and it's not just an oppositional one, I cared about it before, is that we have much more strategic budgeting, budget setting, and prioritization in government here. We obviously have it's not a unique system of government, but it's unique in these islands, but it's not unique in the world. A consociational power sharing system which reflects, historic divisions and the fact that we were in a conflict, but that doesn't negate, and so that places, as does being in a devolved region, albeit with a unique relationship with the rest of Ireland, we are in a devolved region of the UK, which has limited revenue raising powers. We might come on to talk. Well, I might talk briefly about that as well. But to acknowledge there are limitations on the new executive, like structural limitations, which include the fact that it is a mandatory coalition of sorts, and it is a devolved region which essentially gets allocated spending money. There are limits on their ability on their autonomy. Having said all that and acknowledged that, generally speaking, my strong view would be, with rare exceptions, the Northern Ireland executives since 1998, when they have sat and existed, have been very, very poor at strategic prioritization. And I don't just mean that in a kind of boring management consultancy way. I mean prioritizing a small number of things or a number of things to deliver upon, and being clear with the public about what the targets are and how something's going to be delivered and how choices are going to be made. Obviously, in all political contexts, ultimately choices come down to trade-offs. You have to decide what you're going to prioritize. You have to trade one priority off against another. You have to allocate finite resources. But in Northern Ireland terms, we have rarely had executives who have been willing to be strategic in that sense. Philip might disagree. Totally fair enough. But I would say that we've had very unstrategic policy making. The finance department is one of the, actually has a very particular role in terms of being the engine for delivering on strategic priorities of an executive. But what has tended to happen, certainly it happened with the previous holder of the role, who's now the economy minister, and an able man and an able politician, but did not decide to be a particularly strategic finance minister. And so whenever he came, it would be usually one-year budgets and usually fairly piecemeal, ad hoc, improvised allocations, which now, in fairness, that was also a disrupted mandate because of a collapse that had been caused by Sinn Féin, and there was a pandemic. But there was a complete lack of strategy. So what we as an opposition will be calling for is a sense of strategic direction, a sense of prioritization, and then also targets, meaningful targets that the public can judge those who hold office against. So that's the big thing. I guess the second point then, the slightly more granular bit, is around: are we moving forward more? Do we achieve progress in terms of better budgeting and better? I talked about prioritization, but better fiscal policy generally. This has been a significant debate in the last few weeks, but more generally over the last few years. We now have a fiscal council, which we hope there is a theoretical pledge to put it in legislation to make it a bit more like the OBR or the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council. We think that would be a good thing, but we also think they should have a role in terms of reporting on, as I said, delivery around public service targets. So I think there's an agenda around better prioritization and strategy, but also more close monitoring of delivery. And I think the finance department has a key role in that, rather than simply being a conduit between, a kind of post box between the Treasury and the local devolved departments, and doing kind of in-year, what are called monitoring rounds, where money is rearranged because one department is underspending and another department hasn't spent enough. So those are going to be key themes for me, and I think they're important ones, and they're not all of them are high-level political exciting things that I'm going to get loads of clips for and bludgeon the finance minister over. They're simply about getting better prioritization and better financial management.
And Philip, obviously you also sit on the finance committee, so I'm aware you're also across the brief. And one of the key policy areas that has been discussed a lot around the finances of Northern Ireland for a number of years now has been the devolution of corporation tax powers from Westminster to allow Stormont to vary the Northern Ireland rate. We've seen how successful the Republic of Ireland have been in this, in attracting FDI, and I know, Philip, that's something that you said is important in your kind of opening introduction. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on the progress of devolving corporation tax over this mandate, and if you think it'll still be an executive priority.
Yeah, no, thank you, Matthew, and let's accept Matthew's points well made in relation to the difficulties of the previous executive. Of course, that was an executive that both Matthew's party and my party served in. So I think we all have lessons to learn to sort of move forward from that. But no, as you say, Matthew, it's been a priority for us in terms of getting that devolution of corporation tax across the line. You will have read the UK government's command paper following the recent agreement between ourselves and the UK government in relation to the Windsor framework and changes to that. We'll now have the establishment of a new Exchequer committee, which will bring together representatives of the UK government and the Northern Ireland executive, so that we can now begin to progress this. I think it was a rare example where most of the parties were agreed on that they wanted to see that ability come here to Northern Ireland, that wanted to place Northern Ireland on an equal footing with our neighbours in the Republic of Ireland. We've seen the huge benefits that that has been able to attract to them. There's something that obviously we pushed forward, and I did research before I came on that it was because the SDLP also supported it too. So hopefully it's something that, there's unanimity between Matthew and I on the Finance Committee about doing that. But the key thing, as I previously said, is not just about forming committees and talking about this, but actually getting on and doing it. I think there's an interest, from across the UK, from Ireland, and across Europe now in Northern Ireland with our new trading arrangements and with the corporation tax issue. I think this could be a very exciting time here in Northern Ireland.
And I think obviously we've talked a little bit about the relationship between the UK government and the restored executive and assembly. Obviously, you guys as MLAs are back in there now and in there for the remainder of the term for the next number of years. But if we zoom out to a Westminster perspective, we're obviously looking at a general election later this year. And earlier this month there's been a number of by-elections which saw significant swings to Labour, and it's been well over 12 months now of a significant lead in the polls for the Labour Party. So I wonder if there's any views on kind of how a relationship between the Northern Ireland executive and a future perhaps different UK government might change, and if that might change the conversation on funding and any other matters. Matthew, maybe if you want to go first on that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think first of all, we are the SDLP is Labour's sister party in Northern Ireland. We are both a Labour Party and also a constitutional nationalist party. So we have we're very keen, as I think it looks certainly the people of Wellingborough seem to be, at getting rid of the Conservative government. And we will be saying to the electorate here, certainly in the seats where we are looking to hold and possibly one where we're looking to pick up, we will be saying to voters that the most direct way of getting rid of the Conservative government, and if you're a voter here, is by voting for the SDLP, because there's no doubt over where our allegiances, as it were, what we would countenance in terms of should our votes be necessary. I mean, at the minute it looks like it's going to be a very handsome Labour majority. There's obviously a possibility, and it's certainly not impossible, that the polls narrow, and so those Northern Ireland seats might come into play. And as Philip said, he has some experience of those of where that is, where that comes into play. Though we might disagree on some of those events and how they played out, but that's for our perspective. I guess in that election we were very keen that there is no longer a Conservative government, and part of it is not just because, I mean, at a kind of broader level, we totally disagree with the policies followed by the UK government. Not just obviously hard Brexit and the culture and the Allied culture wars over the last number of years. And I, in personal sense, can speak from some experience, because I was working until 7 or 8 years ago or 7 years ago in the machine as a civil servant. Certainly, austerity has two of the most, I think, definitively failed policies of modern history pursued by a modern state. Unnecessary and punishing austerity, which has hollowed out the state and the public realm in all parts of the UK, including Northern Ireland. And then number two, obviously Brexit. So for those reasons, there are big global, or bigger reasons to get rid of them. And in terms of in relation to what it means for Northern Ireland, I would hope, my strong hope would be that it would be a stabilising thing, not least because the Labour government certainly, I think the key people who would be involved in the Shadow Secretary of State and others, and indeed Keir Starmer himself and some of his advisors, have high levels of personal knowledge about Northern Ireland and about the complexity of it, and about Anglo-Irish relations, and about the island of Ireland, and about the complexity of our history and the richness of the Good Friday settlement, and all of those things I think augur well, not just bluntly for one side, as it were, and I don't like using that concept, but one side or the other. No, I think for all of us, genuinely, and for everyone on the island of Ireland, and for Anglo-Irish relations, I think it's been a very destabilising time. I think it would stabilise it a bit, and that would be hugely welcome. I would hope, and we would certainly be making the case. We are a sister party of Labour, and obviously share those broad Labour social democratic values, but we aren't in the Labour Party, so we won't be kind of beholden to agreeing with all of their policies by any means. We would hope for as much ambition as possible in relation to public spending and a financial settlement, and that would include Northern Ireland. So I think from those perspectives, it would be in broad terms a positive thing. I think it's also worth saying that, you know, some of the it's clear that some of the destabilization and some of the conversations about change, and we very much believe in, you know, bluntly, constitutional change in the years and decades to come, but the very the sheer irresponsibility and, you know, insanity of the current Conservative government created this context in which the atmosphere was extremely febrile. You had, to put it this way, you had relatively moderate unionists who felt that they were being lied to and insulted and patronized by a British government that they could not trust at all. And I'm not a unionist, but you also had relatively moderate nationalists and people of no constitution who felt like these people are so objectionable, so irresponsible, that we just want out now of this constitutional arrangement. I believe in long-term constitutional change and, you know, a new Ireland, but those aren't the right cool-headed conditions for that to happen, nor, I'm not going to speak for Philip, but nor I think for lots of unionists are those a useful condition for having a conversation about their preference for the constitutional status quo. So believe it or not, I actually think having a less insane, objectionable UK government is in the interests of everybody, whatever their constitutional perspective.
Okay. Thank you. Philip, do you want your reaction?
Yeah, no, listen, the people, as Matthew says, people of Northern Ireland, they don't think have anything to fear from a UK government led by Keir Starmer. Wouldn't have been the thing I would have said in 2017 had the leader of the Labour Party still been Jeremy Corbyn. So I think we've seen a great change in the Labour Party. And Keir Starmer has been very sound on his unionist credentials and keen to see Northern Ireland remain an integral part of the UK. Of course, the DUP has a great relationship with the Labour Party. We've supported them in relation to opposing the current UK government's Rwanda bill. We joined with Labour in opposing the Legacy bill and with the SDLP. So as a party, we'll work with whoever holds the keys to number 10 for the betterment of Northern Ireland. We did a lot of work in terms of highlighting our issues with the protocol and the Windsor framework with the Labour Party, and we welcome the fact that the Labour Party supported the command paper and the outworkings of that we secured with the UK government. So regardless of who holds office, by the end of this year or the start of next year, we will work constructively with them. I tend not to try and predict elections because that tends to not work out too well for me whenever I do that, but I think the polls are pretty clear as to who's going to be the next Prime Minister of the UK.
Great, thank you. We've talked a lot about finance, and it might be useful to move on and talk a bit about the economy portfolio. And Philip, obviously, as chair of that committee, you have a similar role in scrutinising the work of that department. Obviously, it's a department that your party has held previously in a number of executives, but this time was the first pick of Sinn Féin. So I just wondered, obviously, and Conor Murphy is now the minister in there. Obviously, it's a vast department with responsibility for kind of the overall economic strategy of the executive, including inward investment, tourism, energy policy, skills, higher education. I know that some of the viewers today will be interested in kind of what's going on in the energy and decarbonisation policy area. It's obviously going to be a huge item during the rest of this mandate due to the commitments made in the energy strategy from 2021. It set a number of targets. I think, you know, the main one really being 80% of our electricity should come from renewable sources by 2030. I wonder if you've kind of any thoughts on how Northern Ireland can achieve this and what's needed to achieve this.
Sure. Yeah, so energy strategy, as you say, Matthew, published in 2021, and then action plan published 2022, had set a target of 70% renewables, but that was then changed by the climate bill that was brought through the Assembly. So what our energy strategy aimed to do was set a realistic target, which consumers and businesses could meet here in Northern Ireland, and a realistic one. How we could also focus on driving down energy prices, but also growing that green economy, which will be vital to the sort of 10x vision and growing the economy that the party has. We used our first time allotted in the Assembly last week to discuss the issue around planning reform, because I think this gets to the heart of meeting our energy targets. Regionally significant planning applications here in Northern Ireland that focused on green energy have been so slow in getting through the system. They've taken 2-3 years to get out of the system, which means then that our targets that we're all collectively working to try and achieve are becoming more and more difficult. So what we're keen to see is that there is that joined up approach between the Department for the Economy and the Department for Infrastructure that enables us to get the planning permissions that are needed through to ensure that we can actually reach those targets by 2030, which will not only attract jobs and grow investment, but also actually reduce energy costs for consumers here in Northern Ireland. One of the more exciting things is a lot of these new energy projects are actually based by Northern Ireland firms. And it's a big intake of people here in Northern Ireland working in that sector. So it's about trying to also keep as much money of consumers spent on energy here in Northern Ireland. So it is going to be a major focus for us, and I think the entire Assembly to try and move the strategy forward.
Great, thanks. Matthew, I wonder if you conscious from a leader of the opposition point of view, it'll be something that you'll be keeping a close eye on, that the executive are doing everything to meet the net zero targets.
Well, very much so. I think, look, I mean, I think the biggest issue that we face on this planet this century is how we deal with climate emergency, transition to net zero in a way that is just, in a way that maximizes economic opportunity. And I think Northern Ireland has, as other parts of these islands do, has particular strengths in relation to our geography, the fact that we are in big, we basically live on a couple of blustery rocks in the middle of the North Atlantic. Obviously, we have had we've had significant success actually in some ways in growing our renewable sectors in Ireland and the UK. We'd like to do more on that. There are a whole range of targets that are in the energy strategy. We'd like to see a more specifics in terms of the delivery plan and action plan, because I was on the economy committee. I'm not in this mandate, but I was on the economy committee for part of the last mini mandate, and it's clear that there is ambition and aspiration within the economy department, but some skepticism within the renewable sector about both the renewable sector locally, but also people, I'm sure possibly people who may be interested in this call or listening to it, people who are, for example, investors based in London or Dublin, and we obviously need to be bluntly attractive to capital and investors in terms of getting those projects underground. They need to be commercially attractive, and as Philip said, that asks a whole range of other questions in terms of the speed of the planning system and the joined upness or otherwise of the infrastructure department and economy. I would also say, and there's another theme that we are going to be as a party certainly particularly keen to hold Conor Murphy to account on, and it does connect to energy, and that's around growth in the north-south all-island economy. And that's not without, we don't say that without, we say that with no prejudice to the importance of the UK market and the east-west economy. We don't think there's a choice there, certainly not one that has any constitutional ramifications necessarily. But I think, for example, when it comes to energy, we have the the proposed north-south infrastructure, which in fairness, I think both main unionist parties support and see the value of. But the north-south interconnector, for example, can be part of making Northern Ireland a real renewables powerhouse. And the electricity generation is part of the much talked about protocol, now Windsor framework. So Northern Ireland is able to sell renewables theoretically into the Republic of Ireland, and therefore onto the entire European grid, and of course into the UK market. So there's a huge commercial opportunity there for us to take advantage of as part of our net zero, not just ambitions, but our necessity to deliver on net zero. There's then obviously a whole range of other areas where the path is going to be bumpier, but we are going to be holding not just the economy minister, but other ministers, including the environment and agriculture minister. And I would say in parenthesis that it's in Northern Ireland, unfortunately, we have hugely important to agriculture is economically. We have perhaps sometimes somewhat de-emphasized or forgotten about the environment relative to our agriculture sector. So we will be holding that minister to account too in terms of delivery on our ambitions. It really is somewhere where we are a huge laggard, and I'm not just talking about in relation to some other world leading countries. I'm talking about in relation to England, Scotland, Wales. We are a real laggard. Okay. That's I should say in terms of some of our climate targets. We aren't so much a laggard in relation to renewables, but more in relation to some of our environmental and climate obligations.
Yeah. No, thank you. Good points. I think you both talked about the importance of trade, whether it's east west, north south. One of the key things that was in the recent agreement, Philip, that between your party, the DUP, and the UK government was talking about an NI enhanced investment zone, and obviously it's something that investment zone city deals is something that's been talked about a lot of times and included in numerous agreements, but and also have been delivered across other parts of the UK. I'm not sure we've seen that delivery on the ground anywhere in Northern Ireland yet. I know there was some commitments in there around spending and tax levers. I just wonder if there was kind of any view on that. Is it a priority for your party, and do you see it as a facilitator for growth?
Yeah, I actually think it's quite as I say, a really exciting time. So city deals, nearly all of Northern Ireland is now covered by city deal projects. Some of those are moving on faster than others. Probably Belfast is at the most advanced stage, which Matthew and I will be happy about as Belfast representatives. We have the Union Connectivity Review, which is moving forward. We have the All Island Rail Review, Shared Island, and as you say, then the special economic zone for Northern Ireland and also Freeport. So, this is another really exciting opportunity for Northern Ireland to draw down at least 150 million, as indicated within our command paper with the UK government. Now the executive need to come together to bring all these different projects and levers together to get one strategic vision as to how we get the best bang for our buck on this one, and how, as you rightly say, Matthew, it's not simply something on paper or an agreement or a small portion, but it's something that is strategically used to the best ability here in Northern Ireland, focused, tying in all those other partnerships that we have in place, working with the UK government, working with the Irish government to try and maximise the investment potential here in Northern Ireland. So for any investor out there, I actually think that this is a very, very exciting time.
Thanks. Matthew, I don't know if you, I'm conscious it was in Northern Ireland enhanced investment zone is not something maybe that you were focused on from a point of view of it was in a DUP and Conservative agreement, but I'm sure there's some elements that which you'd be interested to see, and I know there's some in your party are very focused on city deals for the Northwest as well.
Yeah. Well, indeed. I mean, we aren't. We don't only talk about the Northwest. As Philip said, I am a Belfast MLA, so I wouldn't want that message to go out. We obviously are very keen. Our leader and other representatives in Derry are rightly so very focused on addressing the long-standing imbalance between the Northwest and the rest of Northern Ireland, but also the rest of Ireland, the rest of the island of Ireland, and that persistent underperformance, which candidly has really been there since partition. But in relation to the enhanced investment zone, we weren't involved in negotiating it, so I'm not. It would be. I respect Philip's enthusiasm, and I actually share a lot of it in terms of economic opportunity for Northern Ireland. What I do want to see is an enhanced investment zone. If we can agree on what it means, what it is, and what the offer is, I think that'll be really important. And I would certainly be asking Conor. Though we are not happy about the process that led to the agreement between the DUP UK and the principle of a bilateral discussion between one government and one party is something that we do actually quite fundamentally quite object to. We're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth in relation to a set of economic arrangements which might be advantageous for all the people here. But we do want to see detail and clarity and follow through on what that actually is. And also, there's what we can't do is confuse potential investors, job creators about the complexity of our offer. And we can't have one minister, one group talking up, for example, our dual market access under the protocol, and then another one sort of downplaying it, or indeed another one talking up our participation in UK trade deals, and then other ones, someone else. We kind of need to have a clear offer and a concise offer that is comprehensible and can be sold. I have always said, and I've been really loud about talking about the fact that we know part of the reason we have these unique arrangements is that we are divided still, unfortunately, but we can at our best we can overcome the division. But we're still a dual, in many ways, society. We have a dual identity, still part of the UK, but with this unique enhanced relationship with the rest of Ireland, and a route to constitutional change for people like myself who want to seek it. But whatever our constitutional arrangement we're going to be a binational dual society with overlap in that identity for a lot of people too. So that has obviously, as we know, and that has been a source of division and conflict in the past. But in a strange way, it might be a source of economic advantage. And I think that can be a really positive thing. If we can turn that duality, that the thing that has given us hang-ups in the past about this region being both British and Irish, and people here, if we can turn that into an economic advantage, I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think we need to be clear about that. So that's the big kind of politician's thematic answer. But we then need to get really clear about what the actual policy offer is, and what the tax or regulatory or trading offer is for, because we can't confuse the person who is on the investment committee at, I don't know, I'm just picking, I shouldn't pick particular businesses out of the thin air because it's irresponsible in a call, but you know what I mean, the theoretical pharmaceutical company who is thinking about locating a distribution centre or a manufacturing site in Northern Ireland because it allows them a degree of regulatory duality and dual market access. We need to be clear and consistent about the offer. And we also need to make sure, and something else I've said is that we need to make sure the IDA, which is one of the most successful possibly the most successful inward investment agency of basically the modern economic times, is working very closely. We would like to see it work extremely closely indeed with Invest NI to maximise that offer. And also, and I have no difficulty saying this, the UK Department of Trade is singing from the same hymn sheet. So we want people, whether they are, as it were, UK diplomats or trade envoys, saying the same thing that an Irish government envoy is saying about investing in Belfast. And by the way, we also, what I would like to see is people in the Directorate General of Trade in Brussels, when they are talking to people about potential places to invest, they have, not just at the back of their head, but somewhere in the middle of their head, the fact that there is this region, there is this place in the continent that has this special position. I think if we can get to a place where we agree on being able to sell this place and to an extent embrace its duality, notwithstanding the fact that we do remain part of the UK, albeit some of us have an aspiration to change that in the medium term, we can start to sell that. And I think that's a good thing. But as I say, two things: we need to be comfortable with that, selling that duality, but also specific. And that isn't a constitutional thing. We just need to be clear and consistent and specific. So we're not saying different things. And if you are a person who's making an investment decision, you know exactly what you're being offered and what you're going to get should you put your warehouse in Craigavon or South Belfast, to pick a place at random.
Yeah, I think there's probably broad agreement on that. Look, I'm very conscious of time, so a huge thank you to both for giving up some time today. It's really much appreciated. And thanks to everyone for joining us online as well. I trust you will have found the discussion informative, and please do get in touch with any questions or comments below. And thanks again to you both for joining us.